This is the APOGEE, my latest custom PC build and for now my endgame rig. Now I decided I wanted to build a new PC back in November of 2023, and so this build has been in the works for a long time. A lot of plans changed and a lot of overthinking was done about it. When I first started thinking of build ideas, I first imagined a mid-tower or even full-tower cases like NV7, H9 Elite, mostly in the Fantex to NZXT brands. I really liked the NV7 and the H9 Elite. I really liked both of those cases, but eventually I ended up on ITX, and that's when the rabbit hole really got deep. Now, I went with an ITX case for this build because not only have I built ITX in the past, I just don't really like the idea of dedicating half your desk to a full tower or even just large mid-tower PC case. And since I've built this PC, I've actually gone to multiple LAN parties with my friends. I have taken this PC many places, and while the weight is comparable to a tungsten cube, it is much more portable than, say, a full tower or even large mid-tower case. Now, starting with the case for this build, I ended up going with the Cooler Master NR200P. Now, this is a very popular case. They don't make it anymore, unfortunately, at least not from what I've been able to find. But I really love this case. It truly is probably my favorite ITX case ever. Now, there is one downside to it that I will get into in a minute, but for now I'm going to talk about the panel access on this. Now, this case is super easy to get into. Every panel just pops off, and the entire skeleton of the case can be disassembled via just a few screws. And for support, this case is really crazy. It supports up to, I believe, 320mm GPUs, maybe even a little bit bigger. The GPU I'm using is 320mm, and it fits just fine. So if you have anything that's less than 330, I'm guessing it would probably fit. Now, for the material of this case, I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's steel. It's very high quality. The entire case is just very well built and very sturdy, and even empty, it has a bit of weight to it. I mean, this completed build, it's like I said, it's comparable to a tungsten cube. It is heavy, but most of that is the components, obviously, but the case itself is very well built, very dense, and I really like it. Now, for being a single chamber case, it actually has a lot of options for cable management. Now, this front panel right here that's only about half an inch thick actually has a decent sized void inside of it. It's hollow, and a lot of the cables in this build, especially like the RGB controller for these cables, which I'll talk about in a minute, is stored inside of this panel and many other excess cables that I have. Also, there's a decent sized void behind the GPU to the right of the motherboard where I've stuffed a lot of the extra power cables, because these cables right here are only extensions. They don't actually replace the power supply cables. So it was a challenge building with these because there was a lot to stuff into this case, but for being as small as it is, it gives you pretty good options for cable management. Now, this case even has two different GPU mounting options. I went with the flat mount because my GPU is over 3 slots. It is truly massive. But you could also mount a dual slot GPU vertically along the front of the case. Now, I didn't do this because I wanted to use these RGB cables and this all-in-one liquid cooler with the LCD screen. But the main downside with this case is it does not come with top AIO support. Now, you cannot mount an AIO up top stock in this case. Now, what I've seen a lot of people do on YouTube and Reddit is essentially mutilate the top panel of the case to allow for a slim radiator with slim 120 fans. But I didn't really want to go that route. I want to do a lot of other stuff with this case in the future. I want to completely rebuild in it, paint it, put a full custom loop in it eventually. I have big plans for this case, and so I just didn't really want to destroy it or do something that I couldn't reverse. And so after a couple weeks of searching, I actually found a Thingiverse link, which I will put in the description just in case one of you has an NR200P and want to top mount an AIO. Super easy. It's just this 3D printable spacer that is about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches thick, and all it does is not only give you more space, but actually give you mounts for a traditional radiator. So I did go with the NZXT Kraken Elite 240 in this case. I'll talk more about it later, but I just really wanted to use that AIO in this build. And what the spacer also does is it moves the IO ports from right here where the IO ports would normally be, and it moves them up to the top of the actual case. So you can still use the power button and the 2 IO ports that the case comes with, but I really love this case. Like, even with the slight modification I had to make, it really fits the bill for all of my needs. Now for the CPU, none of you are going to be surprised if you know anything about computers. I went with the 7800X3D. It's best gaming processor in the world. I did purchase this in July of 2024, so at the time the 9000 series was not out yet, and the 9000 X3D series are still not out yet as of the making of this video, and so I just decided to go with the 7800 X3D. Right now they're actually sold out online. People still want them. It's a great processor, lightning fast. I mean, the last CPU I used was in a very budget build. It was the 10400F. It really just did not compare to this at all. This is an amazing processor. I don't have much else to say about it. Now for the GPU, anyone who has built ITX before will likely recognize this. It's the Sapphire Nitro Plus 7900 XTX. It is a 24 gigabyte VRAM card. I love it. It's insane. It's marketed as a 4K card, but I've only used it in 1440p, and it's insane. It really is insane. The noise levels were a problem for me at first, but once I tuned to the GPU, it is silent. I mean, the AIO pump is really quiet, and sometimes I can hear that louder than the GPU. Now, I don't know much about the super in-depth specs of GPUs. All I know is the VRAM and how much that matters, and for future proofing, I really wanted to go with this card because it has the same amount of VRAM as a 4090 does, and I didn't want to go AMD because a 4090 is literally the cheapest 4090 I could find was $600 more than this card was, and just to go Team Green but get a slightly better card is just not worth it in my opinion. And the 4090 is definitely a better card than this one, 100%. I will never argue that, but for $1,000, this is really an insane card. Now for RAM, I didn't go overkill, I'd say, but I did go a little bit on the excess. I went with 64 gigabytes of G.Skill, 6000 megahertz with a latency of 30, and I love this RAM. I've never gone above like 20% usage at all with it. I mean, it's way more than I need, but 32 I just feel like wouldn't last as long. I got all these parts on Prime Day, so I saved quite a bit of money in July, and so this RAM was only $200, but it's still 64 gigabytes of 6000 megahertz. And I read online that it actually is the best, this RAM specifically, not just the latency and speed, but this specific RAM was the best for the 7800 X3D. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but I still got it and I love it. It works great. I didn't go RGB RAM just because I have 3 other sources of light in this build and I didn't want to overdo it. For the motherboard of this build, I'm driving it with an ASRock B650i Lightning, and I've heard that ASRock is kind of like the Toyota of motherboards. They're just super reliable, and I don't know if that's true or not, but from my experience, it has definitely been true. I had no issues with the motherboard when setting it up. It's got pretty good features for an ITX board, plenty of ports. The only problem I did have was I needed to buy a USB 2.0 header hub from NZXT to use the AIO and the RGB cables because they both connect to the motherboard via USB 2.0 header, and this one only has one. And so it was like $25 for the hub, but it did take up a lot of space in this front panel when I was putting the build together. But other than that, the motherboard really is a great motherboard. Now for the SSD, I went with the Samsung 990 Pro 2TB. Now I didn't go with a ton of storage because this is already the fastest SSD that I could find on the market, and I really don't play that many games, so I didn't need a ton of storage. I figure eventually I'll just throw in another 4TB drive somewhere in here. It does have 2 NVMe slots in the motherboard, So I'll just buy another 4 terabyte M.2 SSD and call it a day. 6 terabytes for me is more than enough. That's a lifetime for me. Now, when I made this build, I was really focusing on future-proofing it and not only being able to upgrade it in the future, but not really needing to, at least for a long time. So the only thing that I will likely need to upgrade in the future, if I change much about this build, is the power supply. I did go with the Cooler Master 750 watt 80 plus gold ITX, obviously, power supply, and 750 is plenty for this build, but if I wanted to say swap it with a 4090 or something, I would definitely need a new power supply. I don't plan on going a 4090 route anytime soon, but I figure the first thing I will upgrade eventually will probably be the power supply. This power supply was only $100, that's why I got it. I just didn't want to blow a ton on it. I already spent a lot of money on this build, and it's 2024. Money's tight. The economy is... It's the economy, and so I didn't want to go crazy on like a 1000 watt PSU, and I just don't need it. Now to the parts that you can really see other than the GPU. The AIO I went with, like I said, was the NZXT Kraken Elite 240. Now, I really wanted to use this AIO. That's why I spent so much time looking for a way to vertically mount it, because if I horizontally mounted it, there'd be no point in having the LCD screen because you couldn't see it. And if I bottom mounted it, not only is that horrible for the AIO, but then I'd have to completely change my GPU specs. And so I went down a few rabbit holes looking into this, trying to figure out how to top mount it. And like I said, eventually I found this spacer, which is a dream. I love it. It took me 5 seconds to install it. It literally just sets in holes that are on the frame of the case, and I used some Velcro straps to strap it in, and the radiator just screwed right to it. And so that was that. Super easy, and I love this AIO. It's honestly overkill for the 7800X 3D. It's definitely more than you need, but it runs really quietly, and it's not a new AIO. It's been out for a while. And for any of you that know much about PCs, you'll know that NZXT, they make good AIOs. They're expensive, but they're good. Then for the cables, I went with the Lian Li Strimer Plus V2s, and I believe at the time the V3s were out. I don't know what the difference is. I just bought them because they looked cool, but they were a pain to install because I needed to get that USB 2.0 header hub, which was kind of a nuisance, but it's alright. I'm really glad that I can use these cables and the AIO in this build. It was my dream. I've seen a lot of NR200P builds, and I have never seen one that uses both the Kraken Elite and the Lian Li Strimer Plus V2s, or any RGB cables. On the camera, they might look extremely bright. I promise I have them on the lowest brightness setting right now. Same with the GPU, I have it on the lowest brightness setting. For some reason, no matter how much I play with the exposure or settings of my camera, these cables just show up super bright on camera, and I apologize for that. They are purple right now. I've been running my whole computer setup with around a green theme since I built it. I love plants. I'm gonna count live right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 9 plants in my windowsill, 11 total in my room. I love plants, and I love animals too. I have 8 animals in my room right now. I'll make other videos about that, but I've been using a green theme for... Tangent aside, I've been using a green theme for my setup. I've been using a plant-themed back wallpaper for my desktop. I've had all the lights on green. I had an underglow on my desk green. Green's my favorite color. Love plants, but I decided to switch it up. I went purple, and I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but it's purple. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about was the fan configuration I went with for this build. So, not only do I have the GPU fans behaving as intake fans, there's 3 fans on this graphics card. They're smaller, they're not like 120s or anything, but they are the intake. They're the sole intake for this build. I also have the AIO fans, which are 2 120mm fans set to exhaust, so traditional chimney style case, but then I also have a 92mm Noctua fan on the rear set to intake. I've experimented switching it between intake and exhaust, and I haven't really noticed that much of a difference. I've noticed that when I have it on exhaust, my CPU temperature might be 1 to 2 degrees higher Celsius, but it hasn't really made that much of a difference switching it, so I've just left it on intake. Most people building in the NR200P or any non-traditional or any ITX case have used their rear fans actually as intake versus on a mid tower or full tower, you're always going to use it as exhaust. This is my first ever YouTube video, so it will definitely not be the highest of quality. Hopefully it only improves from here, but I plan to just have fun on YouTube, making the kind of videos I want to make. And I really wanted to show you guys this build. In the future, I do want to make an overview video about all of my peripherals and what I use, because I do really use some obscure things that I think people would truly benefit from knowing about. For example, my keyboard. I won't get much into it, but it was a cheaper keyboard that I really love, and I do think a lot of other people would love. Same with really a lot of other peripherals that I use. Anyways, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you did, I really appreciate it. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing and perchance even liking the video, I would appreciate it so much. But thank you so much for watching if you did. Anyways, have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.